From the latest on Caribbean cruises to kosher safaris, pilgrimages to Jewish Eastern Europe, and award-winning wines and international cuisine in sun-drenched Tel Aviv. Sit back and enjoy the trip with the travel edition of the Jerusalem Post podcast.
Good afternoon, David.
Good evening.
And good night.
Well, it is dark outside.
Yes, but it's winter, so it's dark in the morning.
Yeah, well, it depends where you are. But there's an interesting question. What's the shortest or longest day that you've ever lived through?
My final exams, it seemed to go on forever.
Let me rephrase it. Okay, how far north or how far south have you been? And was it at a time of year where there's like 5 hours of daylight or where it never gets dark?
I think we were in Helsinki once on Shabbat. And I remember waiting for Shabbat to go out. And I think it was Sunday by the time Shabbat went out.
So I remember the first time I went to Helsinki, which was in the last millennium, and a member of the community who was an Israeli who also had finished citizenship. And he said, what we do here is we do what the Jewish law says about if you're keeping Shabbat on the moon, that you take it out at Jerusalem time, and that way you're not staying up till silly o'clock.
I think it went out about 11 o'clock according to the rabbinate, but it was still light.
Right. I can remember being in Narvik in northern Norway in the 1980s, actually on the same trip, in 1983, and wandering around the most stunning fjord in the Arctic Circle in August. And I was there late at night. It got like dusky for a couple of hours, and that was it.
Conversely, what's the shortest day you remember?
It must be a time that I was in Edinburgh or Glasgow for a weekend.
I'm trying to remember. Is it shorter in London?
Than where?
Than up north.
The further you go away from the equator, the longer the days are in the summer and the shorter the days are in the winter. The closer you get to the equator, the more balance there is. So if you're actually on the equator, it should be 12 hours of day, 12 hours of night every single day. At least that's the theory.
Maybe it's because Chabad made Shabbat go out later and come in earlier, just so people could celebrate 48 hours of Shabbat.
Oh my God, torture. Anyway, folks, we are going to bring you on this episode a couple of interviews, and it's important to say that in both cases, these were recorded just prior to the outbreak of the war on October the 7th, when Hamas invaded Israel. They are still both very, very relevant. So, Mark, what have we got coming up?
And I'm trying to work out, do they have anything to do with the longest day in the world and the shortest day in the world?
Oh, why I mentioned that in the first place. I really can't remember why.
I think one of them goes near the equator.
Yeah, so that's going to be the first interview with Perry Sugarman. He's going to be telling us all about really exciting, crazy places where you can travel kosher. We're talking all sorts of adventure holidays. So that's coming up in a minute. And then afterwards?
Diamonds.
Are you my...
Not intended and not betrothed.
Diamonds are forever, or diamonds are a girl's best friend? Which one are you?
I'm a rough diamond, I think.
Nowhere I can take it other than to say amen to that. We'll be heading off, if you haven't already guessed, to Antwerp. And we'll be busting a myth about who deals with diamonds in that Belgian city.
Join us after the break.
This is Mark Gordon from the Jerusalem Post Podcast Travel Edition. Find us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at MarkDavidPod, or mail us at markdavidpod@gmail.com.
Do you like to relax on a holiday, David?
It's funny you should say that. I'm not somebody who thinks that holidays are for relaxing. I think holidays are for maximising every second to see, to take in, to breathe, to taste. So, no.
And do you like to sit and just fill your face with chocolates? And
Yeah, but that's an activity, isn't it? I mean, your jaw's moving up and down, so it is exercise.
Because I'm filling my face with chocolates you've left in front of me.
Do you know what? I was going to say something when I hit the record button and I figured I'd go easy on you. I heard the sort of stickiness as you started speaking.
So, as an antidote... I think we should talk to somebody who is a little bit fitter than me and you.
That's pretty much everybody on the planet.
We spoke to a gentleman called Perry Sugarman, who has a company called PJS Challenges, and he takes people out of their comfort zone on kosher adventures around the world.
As I left school and developed, I got into running. That expanded and I was running distance. So I did my first marathon when I was about 18, 19 years old. And it was about probably, I'd say 10 years later. And after completing numerous marathons, I was then asked to start helping some of my friends with some of their physical coaching. And I realized that I was quite knowledgeable, quite good at it. So I then took quite a lot of qualifications. And my background actually is as a coach. I ended up as a British athletics running coach, national standard cycling instructor. I'm a certified Ironman coach. I'm a specialist in HIIT training. And in fact, when I first made Aliyah, I actually spent 4 years at Wingate Institute, the College of Further Education, lecturing about HIIT training.
What is HIIT training?
High intensity interval training. So it's a form of training that's been around for a long, long time, but really started to get very popular in the, what do we call it, the noughties. I put together a system which I launched in Israel with a partner of mine, and my partner and I used to lecture at Wingate in English. The reason why that's important is off the back of that, I was asked to lead a few international bike rides. I absolutely loved it. I then sat on, it was a charity event. I then sat on the board of the charity and I got involved in the organization. I realized that I really loved organizing the events myself as well, obviously with my colleagues who had amazing experience. Then I was kind of asked by kind of groups of friends to kind of lead some trips. So, yeah, we did a hike in the Negev desert one year. And then I actually went with a bunch of guys to Kilimanjaro and climbed Kilimanjaro. It was really then that it really sparked something. I realized that, not wanting to sound big-headed, but I was particularly good at altitude, and that's something which is physiological. You can't train for it. It's not about your age, your fitness level. You're just either good in altitude or not. With the knowledge that I had of coaching, my leader instinct and caretaker, looking after people instinct really kicked in.
Is there demand for adventure travel in the kosher world, or are most people who are interested in kosher couch potatoes like us who'd rather either see Paris or sit and read a page of Talmud?
Well, of course, there's both, and there's a market for both. The reason why I got into specializing in trips that were kosher and Shabbat is because I was asked to lead an event for a religious charity. And obviously, because they're a religious charity, I had to put together the full kosher aspect. I set up a whole system in order to offer to religious Jews a totally authentic, a totally safe, and a totally spectacular trip, but still providing kosher food and a full Shabbat experience. I realized that there was a need for someone to put together lots of different trips to cater for these Jews who wanted to do these kind of adventure trips. And yes, of course, there are a large part of our community that want to sit on a beach or be in a beautiful hotel with 5-star luxury kosher accommodation. But there's also a very large percentage of people who want to go out there and live life and do adventures, see the world, see nature. And I kind of felt like if I wasn't going to do it, no one was going to do it. I've built the business on providing all of our trips on a kosher and Shabbat basis. I mean, don't get me wrong, we do have, non-religious Jews come on our trip, and there are certain aspects that they don't need. And we have plenty of non-Jewish clients as well, either that come with Jewish groups, believe it or not, and absolutely love what we do and the environment. And we have, we also have trips for non-Jews where we're not using the same facilities, but we can provide for anyone.
You provide kosher adventures. How does that work in the middle of nowhere?
We're really not in the middle of nowhere for most of our trips. We are taking people to exceptional parts of the world, be it mountain climbs, treks, or wonders of nature. And it's all about how we set things up in advance. It's really down to our due diligence and what we do in order to set up. It takes us a long, long time to select the right crew to work with. It can take anything from 6 months to 3 years to select the crew that we think are going to be able to provide the service that we need for our clients who have, quite a lot of special things that need to be done for them. The important thing is that we set up kosher facilities wherever we work. So we invest heavily in equipment. We're operating in 15 countries around the world on 4 continents. So we're setting up kosher facilities in all of these places. And these are our privately owned kosher facilities. We're not talking about a kitchen that anyone can go and use. We're talking about investing in equipment and, sometimes 2 or 3 sets in one place because of logistics.
Tell us about some of the adventures, the expeditions that you lead.
We can cater to the real adventurer that wants a really tough mountain climb. And we can cater to the kosher traveler who doesn't want any physical exertion whatsoever and just wants to see amazing things for a once-in-a-lifetime trip. So that would be anything from climbing Mount Aconcagua or Mont Blanc or some technical mountains in the Himalayas, which is quite tough, some of which we would only take clients that had previous experience. Some of them are okay for beginners. And then on the flip side, right over the other end of the spectrum, we're doing luxury safaris in Tanzania. We're doing cruises of the Galapagos Islands, and we're doing tours within the Arctic Circle in Norway where you're, watching the Northern Lights and dog sledding and amazing fun adventures like that. So we do have a very wide range of trips that are really suitable for anybody, the super adventurer and just those that want to see the wonders of nature. The important thing that we like is that whenever we put on a new trip, they have to be an amazing once-in-a-lifetime trip. Now, that's really our mark. A trip only goes in our portfolio if it's a trip that you'll probably only do once in your life.
Are any of those trips in Israel?
The only trip that we do in Israel, which we do quite regularly, is Yam Liyam. It's a very popular trip. It's a nice short trip. We do anything from a 3-day to a 5-day. It's one of those trips that us living in Israel, or if you're living around the world but you're Jewish and you're a regular to Israel, you know of Yam Liyam. But in actual fact, I've been on the summit of Kilimanjaro and met Germans, Scandinavians, Australians, none of who were Jewish, who had heard of Yam Liyam and were dying to come and do it.
Yam Liyam is a lot of fun, but it ain't a challenge. It's a good introductory, perhaps, trip. You said there are certain walks that beginners can't do, but do you have a program for beginners so people aren't going to be scared to join in something?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, one of the things that I pride myself on the company is that we have myself and my leaders who also work for me and take groups around if need be. One thing that I'm very proud of is that we have personal contact with every single solitary client that we take. So we have a registration procedure where clients have to give us a lot of their details and their medical history. But we're in constant contact with these clients before they come on a trip. So we understand what they're good at and what they're not so good at. And obviously, with my professional background, we have on our website, we have a training schedule that is a kind of generic one, which helps for most of our beginner trips. But a lot of our trips that sound like they're actually for experienced trekkers or hikers or climbers are actually absolutely fine for beginners. So, for instance, Kilimanjaro is our blue ribbon event. It's the trip that we do most of. It's very, very common for us to have clients who have never even slept in a tent, never mind been on a trek, a hike, or a mountain climb before. With the right training, so long as you're a little bit physical to start off with, then there's no problem in training enough for a lot of the adventures that we put on.
Have you been up Everest?
Going up Everest, I presume you're talking about from base camp higher. Everest Base Camp trek is, again, one of our very popular treks. So we've done that multiple times, and it's absolutely stunning. I have a theory about climbing Mount Everest. I always tell my clients, Mount Everest, I believe, is the same as making Aliyah. And I think with both of those things, unless you have a burning desire in your heart that you cannot live unless you do them, you're not going to be successful at them. There's a higher chance of failure. I had that with Aliyah. I don't personally have that with Everest. Climbing mountains is my living. That's a different scale. I'm very aware of my position and what I do. My local guides are always the number one on our trips. The local guides have all the knowledge. We only use local guides. We don't bring guides from other parts of the world. We like to try and support the local economy, and we use local crews and local guides. I'm also very aware that climbing Everest is something that's a little bit above station. It's a little bit different to what I do. So, and, some of these things is a busman's holiday for me. So, if I'm climbing and trekking all year long, then to go off and do something on my own, I don't really have the time. Never say never. Maybe one day. Who knows?
What's the website for PJS Challenges?
So very simple. The website is pjschallenges.com.
Perry Sugarman, thank you so much indeed for sharing your experiences and joining us on the podcast.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And now the latest news with the Jerusalem Post podcast Travel Edition. As forecast on this podcast, numerous international airlines returned to Tel Aviv in January. At the time of recording, several additional national carriers and low-cost airlines are planning to resume their services. The German carrier Lufthansa led the way, along with group members Austrian and Swiss Air.
Passenger numbers are on the up at Ben Gurion International Airport. As many as 25,000 people pass through the airport each day. While this is significantly down on pre-war levels, the statistics show that more and more people are travelling post-October 7th, 2023.
Celebrity Israeli chef Eyal Shani opened his first kosher restaurant in New York, New York. The meaty menu offers curiously named dishes such as okra bathing in red tomatoes, lamb steak soaked in grapes, and a dear memory of a Jericho potato. Just 2 months ago, Michelin awarded a star to another of Shani's New York restaurants, Shmoneh.
The Druze minority of Israel is fiercely loyal to the country and everything blue and white. Its young men serve in the Israel Defense Forces shoulder to shoulder with their Jewish counterparts. The ongoing war with Hamas has proved it's not only the Druze young men who are doing their bit for the country. The soldiers' mums are also stepping up to the plate, quite literally. Restaurateur and war widow Basma Hino has koshered her Nor Cafe so she can serve observant Jewish soldiers and evacuees. And if you want to pay Basma a visit, her eatery is in Julis. You're listening to the Jerusalem Post podcast Travel Edition. Find us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at MarkDavidPod or mail us at markdavidpod@gmail.com.
Are you still thinking about potatoes in Jericho?
I am so utterly confused. First of all, I'm guessing that the menu, which I'm sure is incredibly tasty, but I'm reckoning that that menu was translated into English by a non-native English speaker.
You do realise if we ever end up in New York, we're never going to get an invite.
But it might be worth going to find out what a Jericho potato is. I'm wondering if it actually means a Jerusalem artichoke.
That would be a really rough translation.
We should have Googled it. Talking of rough... You're into TV shows. Was this a Netflix thing?
Are you saying I'm a couch potato?
Oh, dearie me. Was Rough Diamonds Netflix?
Yes, it was on Netflix. There was a series called Rough Diamonds. It was filmed in Antwerp and it tells the story of the ultra-Orthodox community there and their diamond trading.
Antwerp is a fascinating city, which we're going to hear all about in a minute from tour guide Ari Aptica. But I guess the starting point has to be to what extent, if at all, the show Rough Diamonds is an accurate portrayal of life in the ultra-Orthodox community and in the diamond industry in the city.
The series was filmed in Antwerp with local actors. It was filmed on locations in Antwerp, in the Jewish area, in synagogues in Antwerp. People from the Jewish community assisted in, getting the Yiddish accents right, etc., getting the customs right. Of course, it's just an area in the city that you're seeing. Antwerp has 540,000 inhabitants, and of those, about 20,000 are Jewish. Within the Jewish community, the majority is religious and ultra-Orthodox. So that part is correct. In the diamond business, today, the majority of diamond traders are from Indian background, but there are still quite a lot of diamond traders with a Jewish background. So the series gives, let's say, a correct image of that particular aspect of Antwerp, but there is a lot more to Antwerp than just the Jewish area and the Diamond District.
Has the show brought any more tourists into the area?
Not that I'm aware of. What I do notice is that people have watched the show because it was very popular on Netflix. And I see that mainly people from English-speaking countries like the United States regularly mention that they saw that show. Not that much. People from surrounding countries, as far as I picked up, but I don't think that it had a big impact on the amount of tourists we get in Antwerp.
Time to talk about the Jewish story of the city. As we've already said, today there is a strong Jewish element to the town, but where did it all begin?
It actually began relatively late because in the Middle Ages, Jews were chased out of Western Europe. And in the 16th century, we had a religious conflict between Catholics and Protestants. The Catholics won. And in the next 2 centuries, Catholicism was the only religion that was allowed to be practiced here in the southern Netherlands, in what we today call Belgium. But when did Jews start to arrive? Well, after the French Revolution, we had religious freedom. And then when Belgium became independent in 1830, they wrote religious freedom into the constitution. At the same time, there were millions of Jews living in Eastern Europe who started to feel uncomfortable there, who were discriminated against, who were subject of pogroms, and they begin to flee towards the United States. In order to reach the United States, they need to reach port cities in Western Europe, and Antwerp is a major port city in Western Europe. So sometimes I ask people on my tour whether they saw the musical or the movie A Fiddler on the Roof. If they are from a Jewish background and certainly from an American Jewish background, they usually say yes. And then I tell them, if you want to talk about the Jewish story in Antwerp, it basically starts where A Fiddler on the Roof ends, because it ends with them getting on a train and saying, we're going to America. And then you get the end credits. But that train doesn't go all the way to Grand Central Terminal. At some point, you need to get on a ship. And the shipping line that went from Antwerp to New York was called the Red Star Line. And hundreds of thousands of Jewish immigrants and other immigrants took the Red Star Line between 1870 and 1930. And the majority of them made it to the United States. I mean, there are more than 1 million Jews in New York and 20,000 in Antwerp. But some of them stayed behind, maybe because they liked it here, maybe because they didn't manage to get into the United States, maybe it was too expensive, they didn't get a visa, etc., etc. All kinds of reasons that made a small percentage of those immigrants stay in Antwerp. And together with Jews that arrived in the same time period from the Netherlands, from France, Germany, etc., they began to form a community back in the 19th century.
You mentioned the Jews make up about 20,000 people out of 500,000 people. That means there's obviously a lot more to do in Antwerp than the Jewish quarter. What else is there to see in Antwerp for tourists?
We have a very beautiful historic center with a beautiful Gothic cathedral. And the entire area around there is very vibrant. There are a lot of historic buildings to see. We have nice museums, the Museum of Fine Arts. The Rubenshaus Museum, unfortunately, is closed at the moment for renovations, but you can find paintings by the famous painter Rubens, who was from Antwerp, in several museums in Antwerp. The area around the old port is also very beautiful. It also has a nice museum called the Red Star Line Museum, which tells a story that I referred to about the migration. And the interior design of the Red Star Line Museum was done by the same interior architects that did the Ellis Island Museum in New York. So basically, you see like the other side of the story. The central station of Antwerp, according to it, there are some websites that make rankings of the most beautiful railway stations in the world. Some of those websites put us on the first place. Those are excellent websites. There are other ones that put us on like the fifth or the sixth place. Those are fake news websites. I mean, don't. But it's a magnificent station, and I regularly get American visitors who say, "Oh, this is even nicer than Grand Central Terminal." I even get the occasional Israeli who tells me that it's even nicer than Arlozorov station. So. So there are quite a lot. The south area is also beautiful. The Zurenborg area, we have some nice parks. So there's definitely quite a lot to visit in Antwerp.
So there's a lot to see. How long do people need in order to see it?
If you want to see all the things that I've mentioned, you would need a weekend. If you want to see all of that, stay at least 2 nights, and then you can cover all those things I mentioned.
As regular listeners to this podcast will know, Mark is an alcoholic, and I just get drunk very easily. They will also know that Belgium is the epicenter of fine beers. What role, if any, does Antwerp play in the beer story of Belgium?
You have dozens, if not hundreds, of local breweries, and some of them are located in Antwerp. I don't think that the beers that are brewed in Antwerp are known worldwide, like, for instance, Stella or Neffe, but we have very good beers in Antwerp. The beer that is mostly associated with Antwerp is called Koning, or as we call it in our local dialect, a bolleke, which refers to the ball-shaped glass of that it's served in. And today, the former brewery where it was brewed today is like a beer experience center that you can visit and get the entire story of beer. We have some other breweries. There is even a Jewish brewer in Antwerp. I don't think you can visit his brewery, but you can order the beers he's brewing online. Even if you're staying for like 3 weeks, you'll be able to drink a different beer every evening and even more of those. So there is no lack of beer in Antwerp.
David, you finish the interview. I'm on my way to Antwerp.
Being as we are the Jerusalem Post, obviously a lot of our listeners, readers are interested in the kosher offerings wherever they may want to visit. Presumably, given the population, there are options for kosher food in Antwerp.
For sure. The most famous kosher restaurant is probably Hoffi's, which you can take away food or you can eat there. And also a lot of non-Jewish people go there because they also, give tasting platters where you can try all kinds of different Jewish foods like latkes, gefilte fish, etc., etc. Another icon is Beni Falafel, which is a falafel restaurant which was started by a Yemeni Jew already back in the 60s or 70s. He's not working there anymore. The falafel place still exists. There is a kosher Italian restaurant. There is a kosher Asian restaurant. So there are half a dozen good kosher places where you can eat, and they're all located in the Jewish area. And then there are also Jewish Israeli style restaurants that are not always kosher, but that a lot of time have a lot of vegetarian and vegan options.
Is there a kosher hotel at all, or some sort of kosher accommodation that people could find?
In the large hotels which are located in the Jewish area, usually you have an option to get a kosher breakfast and to get a room with a physical key that you can use on Shabbat, that have an entrance without an automatic door so that you can enter on Shabbat. And there are also a few smaller kosher guest houses.
Ari, how do people find out more details about walking in Antwerp?
You can find our tours on our website, walkinginantwerp.be. We offer tours in Dutch, English, French, and German. If you want to book a private tour, you can do that in any language you want. Our scheduled tours, we have a Highlights of Antwerp tour in English and in German and in Dutch, of course. We have a tour of the Jewish area, but that one, the scheduled one, at the moment is only in Dutch, but we're thinking about maybe adding an English option next year as well.
Ari Uptaker from Walking in Antwerp Tours, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
Antwerp Fact File. Antwerp has a small international airport with flights planned from Tel Aviv. Brussels Airport is a further 25 miles away. You can fly with Brussels Airlines from JFK, Tel Aviv, London, Paris, United Airlines from Chicago O'Hare, Newark, Washington Dulles, Delta from JFK, and BA, Air Canada, Turkish, Emirates and Lufthansa also serve the airport. Antwerp Airport is 3 miles from the centre. Buses 51, 52 and 53 will take you to Antwerp Berchem and Centraal Railway Station. Taxis are also available. From Brussels Airport, it's a 40-minute drive or an hour by train and tram to Antwerp city centre. Antwerp has a large number of high-quality hotels, including the Sapphire House and Botanic Sanctuary, as well as Hilton, Radisson and IHG hotels. The Astoria Hotel, Hampton and Astrid serve kosher breakfasts. $100 will buy you 91 euros as of January 2024. In Antwerp, the summers are comfortable and partly cloudy, and the winters are long, very cold, windy, and mostly cloudy. Over the course of the year, the temperature typically varies from 1 to 23 Celsius or 34 to 74 Fahrenheit. Talking of diamonds, Antwerp is a city of culinary gems, including more than 20 Michelin-starred restaurants. Top vegetarian and vegan restaurants include Spritz, Hart, and Lento. Recommended kosher restaurants include Blue Lagoon, 18, Hoffi's, and the vegan Benny Falafel.
Our thanks go to today's guests, Perry and Ari. We hope that you found something, whether it's adventures somewhere out there beyond the normal places that kosher food is available, or if you're looking for somewhere stunningly beautiful and a European city break, then to Antwerp. So thanks to both of you.
At one point, Perry, after the interview, said that we should go and do one of his challenges and maybe go up Kilimanjaro. And I told myself at the end of September last year, when we spoke to him, I would get fit. I'm still telling myself at some point I'll get fit, but maybe it won't be next year.
It is something that's very, very exciting. Back on the Antwerp thing, I haven't been to Antwerp, and I just know from other places that I've been to in Belgium, I know lots of visitors go to Bruges, but also Ghent is stunningly beautiful, and I'd love at some point to get to Antwerp, just because as you know, I'm passionate about European cities, art, culture, heritage.
Do you think they can put a funicular up Kilimanjaro and I'll meet you at the top?
Oh my golly gosh. It's time for us to ask you to help us. No, we're not asking for financial contributions.
Yes, we are.
It's not a bad idea. There are loads of podcasts out there that have Patreons and whatever, but that's not what we're asking. What we'd like you to do is to subscribe, is to share this podcast with your friends. Tell them about it. Tell them how amazing it is, how funny Mark is. It's just something that's important, especially if you're interested in kosher, Jewish, Israeli travel, or anything related to that.
If you've won the lottery, please send a cheque to Mark and David's Travels.
Our email is, on the back of that, markdavidpod@gmail.com, and our social media @markdavidpod. Do drop us a line. Joking aside, we'd love to hear from you. Criticisms, comments, suggestions for places you'd like to hear about.
It's not easy at the moment talking about travel. We have to spare a thought for the hostages that are still in Gaza, the people that are fighting who can't travel at the moment. We hope that this will all be over soon and people can return to travelling as normal.
We recorded this ending of the pod just shy of 2 weeks before the pod is meant to go out. So I guess our prayer from our studio in Modi'in in Israel is that by the time that you hear this, our prayers and thoughts for the release of those hostages have come to fruition, that they're already home with us.
And on that note, we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Take care.